I'm Edward Warfield. I'm the publisher of City Biz, and I'm honored today to interview Brooke Lierman, who's running for Controller of Maryland. Welcome, Brooke.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me today.
So why are you running for Controller of Maryland?
Great question. I have loved being a state delegate representing District 46 in the General Assembly for the past 2 terms. But we have this really amazing chance in 2022 to reimagine how we can use the resources of the Comptroller's Office, sort of slingshotting our state and our communities and ourselves out of this pandemic, through and learning from the racial reckoning we're going through to really make sure that the Comptroller's Office is doing all it can to uplift families and uplift small businesses and support our communities. And so I'm running because I am excited to be able to be an advocate and be a champion in the Comptroller's Office to reimagine how that office can really support our state and move all of us forward. So that's what I'm doing. I'm really excited about it.
So before we drill too deeply into the reimagining of the Controller's Office, give us a little sort of granularity before we drill deeply into your reimagining.
Sure. So the Comptroller's Office is one of only 3 statewide elected officials in the state of Maryland, independently elected. So we've got the governor who oversees all of our agencies. We have our great attorney general who represents us in court. And then the comptroller is the office that sees every dollar in and every dollar out of the state, right? It has a number of really important jobs. The breadth of responsibility, goes from helping ensure that we keep our AAA bond rating to making sure that, Judy and Joe Smith get their tax returns in a timely way. But the other, the things to think about, to remember about the Comptroller's Office, besides the fact that it's one of only 3 independently elected statewide officials, are one, that it is one of the 3 equal members of the Board of Public Works, right? Along with the governor and the treasurer, the comptroller plays a really important role in determining how we spend the money in the state of Maryland, how we spend taxpayer dollars on capital programs. So really holds the power of the purse. It also is the vice chair of the State Retirement and Pension Board. So making sure that we oversee and efficiently manage and invest wisely the retirement dollars for our, 415,000 state retirees. And yes, I'm always reminding people, I'm sorry to let you know, I am running to be the next state tax collector. So there's a number of really important roles that the State Comptroller's Office plays, and each of them has an incredible ability to affect positive change in the lives of Maryland families and communities, and working with and being an advocate for our small businesses.
Can you provide an overview of the issues that are presently facing the Controller's Office?
Well, certainly. So, there are a number of issues that are always facing the Comptroller's Office, but at the end of the day, the Comptroller, has to make sure that it's a watchdog for our Maryland taxpayer dollars, and that it's thinking big about how we use our taxpayer dollars in a way that ensures that we are benefiting all Marylanders, whether that's ensuring that we are cutting down on tax fraud and making sure that everybody's paying their fair share, whether it's ensuring that we are talking about and preparing for climate change. I think climate change is going to be one of the, or if not, it is the biggest challenge that our economy and our state will face over the coming decades. It will affect everything from our AAA bond rating, because the rating agencies are concerned about how we're preparing for climate change, to the kinds of buildings that we build, to the heat island effect and flooding, right? Also ensuring that we are continuing to invest our pension dollars wisely, and that we're protecting our pension funds from the effects of climate change, whether that's divesting from fossil fuels or, thinking about how we can make sure our investments continue growing. So I think there's a number. Other issues include, thinking through how we can continue to make paying taxes easier. One of the things that we have to be doing is ensuring that this is a great place to do business in this country. That Maryland is a state where it's easy to start. We want to make Maryland a state where it's easy to start a business, grow a business, and keep a business in the state. So really thinking big and small about how we are empowering and enabling entrepreneurs to start their businesses and grow their businesses in Maryland as well. And finally, One of the challenges that we have in Maryland is the racial wealth divide in the state, that holds back so many of our Black families and Black businesses, but also that holds back our economy as a whole. So the comptroller's office, I think, can really be a place where we bring people together to talk about how we can change direction or, write our chart a new course to make sure that every family in Maryland has opportunity and a fair chance to succeed. So those are a few of the big issues that I think that we're facing as a state right now. But there's a lot of opportunities. So I'm excited about it.
And so how will you modernize the controller's office, and what are your policy priorities in that area?
Every person has to build on the work of its predecessor, right? And, our current comptroller, Peter Francho, has done yeoman's work moving some of our processes for tax payment off of a mainframe system into a new system called Compass. But modernizing the office of the comptroller, and providing unprecedented customer service has to be and is one of my top priorities, right? That means enhancing the current technologies that we have to handle the volume of data, ensuring the workforce in the comptroller's office have opportunities to grow and learn and are supported, and also just continuing to think about how we make the comptroller's office more transparent and interactive. So I think that everybody should have quick, easy access to information about how money flows through our state governments. I've passed a number of bills over my time in the legislature around transparency, and I really think that our financial records should be an open book. So I want to create a website, Open Book Maryland, that would ensure that every Marylander and every Maryland business knows what the state is paying for, how it's paying for those goods and services, and when those payments are made, so that our contractors, our subcontractors have more transparency and clarity around when they will be paid. I also want to make sure that we are, increasing transparency through private letter ruling process. Every year, federal, state, and local tax laws change. We want to make sure that we are creating a private letter ruling process similar to those of our neighboring states to provide greater administrative tax guidance and transparency to Maryland's individual and business taxpayers, in a really fiscally responsible manner. And I also want to make sure that we're simplifying tax returns as much as we can, to make sure that we're really thinking through how to move more things online, how to ensure that there's an advocate in the office for every business and family, and just ensuring that you have the clarity that you need as a taxpayer to do what you need to do.
And so how can the controller tackle the racial wealth gap? How are you capable of changing that?
Yeah, well, it's a huge question, right? And I have a lot about it on my website. But I think that the comptroller's office is really uniquely situated to focus on income-based issues, right? It is an office that has the data, right? It sees what everybody's making, their salaries going up and down. It sees how businesses are doing. So it's really the office that sees the numbers that tell the story about how Maryland families and businesses are doing. And so it's the office that can help bring people together to tackle this challenge of the racial wealth divide. So first and foremost, I think we should have an equity officer in the office of the comptroller that would really do a deep dive and look and make sure that our policies and practices take the wealth gap into account and that we're intentionally focused on reducing that gap. From procurement to tax collection to tax guidance and preparation services, making sure that there's equitable access, making sure that we are looking at all of these issues. Then I think, there's sort of three broad categories when you talk about the racial wealth divide. There's home ownership and personal property, there's assets and savings, and then there's business ownership. And this is all about growing generational wealth, right? It's not just about income, it's about growing wealth. One of the things that is the most significant factor driving the racial wealth gap is rates of home ownership. So nationally, about 3/4 of white households own their home, but just over 40% of Black households are homeowners. And so we have to really, this is driven by past discriminatory public policy and commercial practices, and certainly like some current discriminatory practices as well. I've worked with Senator Antonio Hayes and Speaker Jones this year on legislation to actually examine the racial discrimination in the appraisal process and in real estate more generally. So a report is going to be generated on that in the coming year, so that we have a better understanding of what the situation is in Maryland. But, I think we need to work hard with the General Assembly to study to look at the home appraisal and assessment gaps in Maryland. I think we have to do a better job at supporting will and estate planning to help build wealth for future generations, looking at how we can do more to support and expand, the Maryland Historic Revitalization Tax Credit, right, which is a huge and a really important way to make sure we're rehabbing homes, as well as Senator Hayes and I just passed legislation to create a program that needs to be funded to fill the appraisal gap. Because often what we see in formerly redlined neighborhoods is that, a nonprofit developer or a for-profit developer will come in and want to rehab a home, right? In East Baltimore, West Baltimore, around the state, frankly, want to rehab a home, but it appraises for less than the rehab would cost. And so there's this gap there, and that gap needs filling so that there's economic incentive to make so that the numbers work. And so this program that we've created would would help developers do that work, and would only kick in if the person they were selling to was a homeowner. Also monitoring small banks business lending, looking at making sure that our banks are lending. In Baltimore, this has been a problem. A recent report demonstrated that in Baltimore, bank deposits nearly doubled from 2007 to 2016, but the ratio of small business lending to deposits plummeted. And so we need the comptroller's office to really engage with our banks to make sure that they're loaning. Finally, also we could talk about assets and savings, making sure that we maintain the expanded earned income tax credit that the General Assembly passed this year. Making sure that the Maryland Saves program, so this is a new program that's going to affect it's a state facilitated retirement savings program. We have to make sure that we're deploying that successfully and helping people looking at college and education access and affordability as well. And finally, I'll just say promoting home business ownership, right? Small businesses employ almost half the U.S. workforce. And we have to make sure that entrepreneurs of color, that Black business owners, that they can access capital. That is a huge challenge nationally and in Maryland right now. And we just lost a huge number of Black-owned businesses in the state and nationally throughout the pandemic. So we have to make sure that we are focusing on helping those business owners, empowering, entrepreneurs of color to invest. We need to have investment, and we need them to be able to start businesses. And part of that is through a procurement, using state dollars to make sure that we can open up markets to Black-owned businesses and other MBE and minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses firms. Looking at cannabis legalization and ensuring that, when we do legalize and regulate and tax cannabis, that we have a robust system that allows for small businesses to be created and grow as well. So there's a whole list of things that I think we should do. And I by no means have all of the answers, but I think the comptroller's office has to be one of the key players leading the conversation and bringing people together to talk about what the solutions are and which solutions are government-based, which ones are business-based, et cetera. So there's a lot of work to be done.
So continuing that discussion with respect to small businesses, what is the Start in Maryland and Stay in Maryland program? And what sort of incentives can you provide for early stage startups?
Sure. Great question. So I'm really focused on making sure that businesses can start in Maryland and stay in Maryland. And I think we need bold and clear and quantifiable goals around small businesses and startup development that our state can strive to achieve. So, I want to make sure that we are working with the Department of Commerce, with TEDCO and our universities, our incubators, to create long-term actionable plans for business support and development. what are those mean? What does that mean? It can mean, early stage startups, they need access to capital, they need incentives, they need support to build in Maryland. They need help cutting through the red tape that currently exists and that we need to eradicate. I think we should have a small business portal that provides small businesses with a single site for tracking their good standing with the state of Maryland, a history of paid and outstanding taxes, debts, fines, and other related information. We really need to streamline the minority and small business certification process, provide resources to small businesses, work to develop inter and intra-governmental resources to support the infrastructure for job creation and corporate development. And we need to look at capital. So one of the real problems in Maryland is the lack of available capital for startups. And the state can help with that, whether it's passing an angel investor tax credit to help support more private giving, whether it's looking at using some of the set aside funds from our pension dollar to invest locally, our pension funds to invest locally in local businesses, and other ways, early stage tax credit incentives and whatnot. But we have to be very strategic and make sure that we're thinking big about how to keep businesses in Maryland. I mean, we get, Johns Hopkins gets more government dollars than any other private university in the country for research. And there are amazing companies that are coming out of our universities. We have to make sure they stay here, right? We have to make sure that they can bring their product to market here, that they know that they have a home here, that they have an advocate and champion at city or county government and at the state government and in the comptroller's office. So I'm excited to work with partners and friends from around the state to ensure that Maryland is the place to do business.
Tell us how procurement will change, the process will change under your stewardship.
Thanks for that question. So, procurement is sort of a shared responsibility among the Board of Public Works and the different agencies in our government. And of course, it's all subject to state law. And the General Assembly in 2017, we voted to really overhaul Maryland's procurement process, saving over $100 million annually. But there's more work to be done. We have to fight wasteful spending and drastically reduce single bid contracts. We have to be more transparent, and we have to make the process just more transparent, more streamlined, and more accessible. Want to be ensuring that our homegrown local small businesses, our Black-owned businesses, get the fairest shot at landing state contracts so that we're keeping economic activity right here in Maryland. So the Board of Public Works is actually responsible for many of the regulations and that are promulgated around procurement. And some of the key points that I want to make sure that we're looking at are sort of improving subcontractor payment transparency, making sure that our subs know when their primes get paid by the state, making sure that they are in communication with the state as well, encouraging state spending with small businesses. Every year, tens of millions of taxpayer dollars are spent on smaller purchases by Maryland employees with purchasing powers, in the state government on state issued credit cards. I want to make sure that there's transparency in the number of purchases, how much being spent at that level, and where it's being spent so that our smaller businesses can participate in those programs as well. Really want to look at reforming and streamlining the bidding process to ensure that we have equitable contracting. Look at creating a mobilization fund, sort of a revolving fund to provide access to capital for vendors who have secured contracts and are preparing for engagement with the state, because that would allow smaller businesses to engage in contracting and prevent them from having to over leverage to initiate their contract engagements. I also think we should look at more cooperative bidding, to offer procurement engagements with Maryland counties, Baltimore City, and smaller jurisdictions to increase purchasing power. I'm an attorney right now, and I actually represent blind-owned businesses that are trying to do business all over the country. So in procurement matters, frankly, with federal agencies, with state agencies. And one of the things that I see happen is, we'll have a local blind-owned entrepreneur or business owner competing for a food services contract at a Navy base or a state office building. And sadly, too often what happens is that a larger, huge corporation, sort of national group comes in and underbids the local blind owned business. And then, the contract is awarded to the lowest bidder, but almost inevitably what happens is that lowest bidder then files change order after change order after change order, increasing the price. And so it would have been better for the state both to be with that small local blind owned business because they would be building wealth among the people who live in their state and supporting these businesses, but also because it would have been a cheaper contract in the end, right? So I want to make sure that we are just really preparing for that as well.
And so what are the policy priorities related to education?
So I'm a mom. I have a son in our local public school, Teddy. He's going into third grade next fall. And we survived a year of online school. And it's been a really challenging time. I'm also the subcommittee, or I chair the education subcommittee for the Baltimore City delegation. And so during my time in the legislature, I've worked very hard to make sure that we are, that we are passing, frankly, the blueprint for Maryland's future, which we passed last year and then overrode the governor veto on this year, as well as the Built to Learn Act, which provides capital funding for schools. So I'm thrilled about the blueprint for Maryland's future. And now what we need to do is to make sure that it's fully implemented. And so the role of the comptroller in that, I think, is both to be a statewide voice in support of our public schools and ensuring that the public and our government, understands, and local electeds, all the way to the governor, understands the importance and the return on investment that exists in investing in our public schools and how important that is. And also that, I'm there to make sure that the taxes are being, collected that go back into those certain funds, right? So, the Bureau of Revenue Estimates is part of the comptroller's office. And I passed a bill this past session, that talks about the BRE, the Bureau of Revenue Estimates, and providing more transparency on how we're funding the blueprint for Maryland's future so that there will be more regular reporting on where the money's coming, what money is coming in, and where it's going. So just really excited to be a statewide voice for our public schools, for our teachers, for our educators, and for all of our students.
And finally, what are the policy priorities for transportation?
So transportation is one of the reasons I initially decided to run for state delegate. Many years ago when I moved to Baltimore, I'm originally from Montgomery County. I went to Walt Whitman High School. I went off to Dartmouth for college and worked for many years and then went to law school. And when I came back, it was for a federal clerkship. And one of my first days, maybe my very first day actually, I went and stood on Eastern Avenue to catch the number 10 bus downtown to the courthouse, and it didn't come. and so I had to find another way to get to the courthouse, and eventually I figured out that I couldn't rely on public transit anymore to get me around in Baltimore, which was incredibly frustrating because, when I lived in DC or Boston, I had always taken public transit everywhere I went. I didn't even have a car in DC. So to me, for me, it was an inconvenience, right? For the 1/3 of Baltimoreans who don't have access to a car, it's not an inconvenience, it's a disaster. And for their employers too, who then do not have access to a reliable workforce. And I hear this from employers all the time, frustration with our transit system. So for the past 7 years, I've been very focused on how can we improve MTA? And, it's not always about money, but I will say for MTA has been starved for the past 7 years. We required MTA to do its first ever capital needs assessment in legislation in 2018. And that came out in the summer of 2019. And what it showed was that MTA, between what it is projected to receive over the next 10 years for its capital costs, is about $2 billion under what it needs just to maintain its assets in a state of good repair, let alone expanding, right? Every system of MTA, our light rail, our subway, our MARC service, our buses break down more than any other comparable service in the country. And that is because we have not been investing and buying the goods that we need. And at the end of the day, that is a huge disservice to every Marylander and every Maryland business. And so I am very focused. We passed a huge bill this year, the Transit Safety and Investment Act, that I was really proud to lead with Senator Cory McCray, that will provide the biggest capital investment in MTA over the next 6 years that's ever been mandated by the General Assembly. Unfortunately, Governor Hogan vetoed that bill, but I'm hopeful that we will override that veto next year because MTA, our businesses, our residents just desperately need that money. So I'm excited to continue being a voice for responsible infrastructure decisions as the comptroller. Whether that's investing in transit, whether it means investing in, rebuilding our bridges like the Hanover Street Bridge, or investing in broadband, right? I passed the Digital Connectivity Act this year, which CNBC just cited as the reason that it named Maryland the most improved state for business climate. So it's legislation like that really goes to show, when we invest in infrastructure, it helps businesses and it helps Maryland residents. And so as comptroller, I'm excited to be a voice and a champion for responsible, smart, and effective infrastructure investment. There's a lot that we can do. And I think we just have to really think big and think strategically about how we use the money that we have. And that's coming to us from the federal government. So we are in a great position. We have great opportunities, just incredible potential. So I'm really excited about all that we can do in a post-pandemic Maryland.
So is there any part of the Brooke Lierman for Controller story that you haven't shared with us today?
I am just really excited to be running a 24 county campaign. I'm going to be a 24 county comptroller and be really devoted to being present and proactive in our communities, championing policies that uplift families, that build financial literacy, that help us tackle and confront climate change, help us, really overcome the racial wealth divide in the state. And at the end of the day, that move us forward as a state together. One of the things that has resonated with me over the past year is that, through the pandemic, we have all lived through the same storm, but we have not all been in the same boat. And the 2022 election is really our chance to chart a new course for our state and to ensure that moving forward, every Marylander and every community and small business is really in a seaworthy boat. So actually, we are electing, this is the first time there's been an open seat for comptroller since 1998. Because in 2006, of course, when Peter Franchot ran, there wasn't an open seat. And we have never had a woman comptroller in the state of Maryland. So I'm really excited to be running to, break a glass ceiling, but also to be an advocate, with you and with people all over the state and throughout the Baltimore region to really build a better Maryland. So really excited to be here and hope everybody will visit me online at, www.brookelearman.com. Thanks.
So, Brooke, I want to thank you for sharing your story, your ambitious and expansive vision for the controller. And all I can say is I'm dating myself, but there was a wonderful predecessor who we talked about, Louis Goldstein, he always had an extra pair of shoes. And so if you're going to be covering every county, go with an extra pair of shoes. So.
Always an extra pair of shoes and always bless y'all real good.
Thanks, Brooke. I enjoyed the interview and we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you. Have a great one. Thanks so much.